Popcorn Therapy, holistic health and wellness through the lens of pop culture. This is a show where we take a dip, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, into the archetypes, symbols, mythologies, systems, and implications of whatever movie or TV show I am watching this week. I'm Julie Peters. I'm a counseling therapist, a tarot reader, a writer, and a witch. I love to think deeply about pop culture and find out what our stories can tell us about who we are as individuals and as a culture, spiritually, psychologically, physically, and in all kinds of other ways. If you like that too, you are in the right place. Welcome to Popcorn Therapy. Okay, welcome back to Popcorn Therapy. We are going to be talking about Return to Oz today, and I have two guests with me who are fellow lovers of the movie Return to Oz. I've got Tracy, who was with me on the Little Mermaid episode, and Mel, who was with me on the Wayne's World episode. So they're actually both return guests, though hadn't met each other until today. So welcome, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself however you want to. Tracy, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'm Tracy. I'm a writer, editor kind of person living in Stockholm, Sweden. I used to be in Vancouver and love Return to Oz. Excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn how we all love Return to Oz too.
Yeah,
We're of a similar generation. You know, we probably loved it around the same time.
Yeah.
And Mel, go ahead.
I'm Mel Z. I run a marketing agency called Raw Creative Co. in Vancouver, and I also do pop culture and true crime deep dives on TikTok as Sorry I Brought It Up.
So if you like Popcorn Therapy, especially the darker aspects of it, Sorry I Brought It Up would be a good a good one to follow. Okay, so let's dive in. I'm going to do a little recap. So spoilers for the 1980 whatever movie. If you haven't seen it, you're probably not listening to this podcast. So it's 6 months since the original events of the Wizard of Oz movie. And Dorothy can't sleep and she can't stop talking about her experiences in Oz. And no one believes her. And she's also not helping Aunt Em on the farm. So they decide to send her to a new therapy, which is electric shock therapy. So she's in this very strange clinic and a mysterious little girl appears and helps her escape just as a lightning storm is beginning. And she and the little girl escape into the river. The river transports her back to Oz, where she finds the place in disarray. The yellow brick road is shattered. The Emerald City is all the people have been frozen into stone. And it turns out that the Gnome King has taken all the emeralds and he's the one responsible for turning everyone to stone. So all her friends are gone. So with the help of her trusty chicken Bellina and TikTok, the Army of Oz, who is an automated sort of robot man, who quote unquote does everything but live, but also must be wound up every time so that he can work. Dorothy tries to help, first by finding Princess Mombi, and then going straight to the Gnome King to ask for Oz to be restored. She vanquishes the Gnome King, everything works out great, and she returns to Kansas, where Toto finds her by a riverbank. And that is the plot, the summary of Return to Oz. What am I missing, guys?
Yeah, I mean, Ozma is a big part of it. Did you mention that? I think you did.
The mysterious little girl turns out to be Ozma, the Princess of Oz. And, some background to this movie is that this movie is much closer to the actual books written by Frank L. Baum. And the original Wizard of Oz, which everyone loved, was not that close to it. It was a little cheerier than the books. The books have a bit of a darker tone to them. I've read them, but I can't remember them super well. I feel like, Tracy, you might have read them more recently than me.
Just been reading them with my 4-year-old, and so I'm almost done. So it's based on The Marvelous Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz. They've sort of taken inspiration from both, and I'm almost done The Marvelous Land of Oz, and we just started the kids, we had to start the second one before we finished the first one. So we're a little ways into the Ozma of Oz. And yeah, it's the world definitely is more reflected in the movie, the Return to Oz movie, than the original.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was doing some research yesterday, just seeing what else I could find, and I was shocked to discover that a lot of people don't like Return to Oz. It's
Yeah.
like
That's what I've always heard from people, that they find it quite terrifying.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually insisted on showing it to a friend of mine who's in her 40s not too long ago, and she was terrified. She was like, that was too scary for me. I didn't like that.
I've never found the movie scary, even like as
No.
a kid. I never the Wheelers I found a little bit scary. I think it's the creepy unhumanness of them
Yes.
while being sort of human was
Yes.
like unnerving, and that kind of laugh kind of freaked me out, but not so bad. And the things that I think scared other people didn't bother me at all. And
Yeah.
actually, because my son was interested, and because he loved the movie when I showed him, so I thought, oh, let's read the books. And then I started looking at it a bit more, and yeah, apparently that's a big reason. The guy who wrote and directed, I think Walter Murch, the reason why he thinks it was so poorly received is because they didn't properly kind of prepare the public that it was such a departure from the Wizard of Oz, and they tried to actively like do that, make it really different and truer to the books. And it's kind of that, I think people subconsciously, that connection to Wizard of Oz, it's hard for them to make that jump.
Yeah, because it
Yeah.
is quite intense. Like I showed it to my nephew a while ago when he was 7, and we had to stop
Oh, really?
when Mombi goes in. That whole scene with Dorothy Gale is so, it scares me still like as an adult. It's unnerving. And so he
Yeah.
was like, let's stop. And we had to stop
Oh.
and then try again the next morning. He sat when it was daylight and could watch it. But the heads, I can see that being quite upsetting, her walking around with no heads, and that scene where all the heads are screaming. It's a lot.
Yeah, I don't remember how old I was when I first watched Return to Oz, but I definitely feel like I was raised on that era of dark fantasy in the 80s. I also loved Labyrinth. Dark Crystal, I don't know that was my favorite one, but it was in the mix. Like we watched all of these movies that have that the claymation or the puppeteering, the sort of uncanny valley of these human, not human characters. And I always loved them.
Yeah.
And the screaming heads, like Mombi, I love Mombi. Like there's something about this.
Same.
She's this sort of goddess-like character who, trades up her head depending on her mood.
Yeah.
And she puts the heads in these beautiful glass cabinets in this castle that sort of all mirrors, and all the heads are so beautiful and perfect. And then that moment where they're all screaming Dorothy Gale, or they're just screaming, and I think Mombi is saying Dorothy Gale, is incredibly unnerving, but it sticks with me in this way where I want to talk about the monstrous feminine a little bit today. Like there's something about that that's always really felt powerful to me. I think there's something about a woman or a feminine energy sort of having power, being something to be feared. I think there's something about that that's always resonated with me in some way.
Hmm.
Yeah, like I
Absolutely.
found that very like thrilling more than scary as a kid, that all of that. And it's funny because it never occurred to me, like, where did she get those heads or any, like, there was never any idea of violence. I would have been probably about 5 when I saw it, but my point of view was like,
Yeah.
wow, because I already was very interested in like changing up my look, like my hair or fashion or things. So the idea of like you could change your whole head, that would be so cool. The ultimate like accessory, changing your whole head. Like I thought it was so cool.
Oh God, yeah.
Uh, yeah, so it's interesting, and even in the book, they don't really make reference to how she got them. Like there's not a violent, like it'd be like magic. Poof, she took their head. You know what I mean?
They
Yeah,
in the
and
movie they do they show the
The
dancing
headless
girls.
statue. Mhm.
Yeah, and so I always thought that's where she got them, or just that she was taking them from the towns women or whatever.
yeah, but when Dorothy vanquishes the Gnome King and everything goes back to normal, the heads just reappear on the dancing girls and they just
Yeah.
keep dancing. Like
Yeah,
there's no real violence in this movie, there's no real consequences, to the sort of
yeah,
violent actions. So we're not so much thinking of Mombi going in and sort of slicing these heads off. It's just that she sort of magically
yeah,
got them,
Yeah.
yeah.
without harming anyone, which is I feel to me it's a very child way of kind of expressing that sort of horror. And at the same time, you know, it makes me think of Medusa, the sort of disembodied head being taken around and having power even after Medusa's death, you know, because it's her head can still turn people to stone, which is what happens in this movie, even after she's dead because of the extremity of her ugliness. And I was thinking about ugliness in this context as well, because one of the things apparently that people didn't like is that Dorothy's friends, so TikTok, the Gump, which is like another head, another disembodied head, that's sort of a green moose that's like not super attractive. Like it's a very weird looking animal that they attach the head to the sofa and then he can fly and all these things. And then Jack, pumpkin head. Yeah, there's another disembodied head there actually too. There's a lot with that. He's kind of weird looking, like he's not a super cute pumpkin head, you know, he's all gangly and strange. And, you know, some people just didn't find, you know, in Disney today, like the sidekicks are always so cute, like unbelievably cute. But even the chicken, it's like a chicken. You know, it's not even as cute as Toto, right? And so I think there was something about, you know, all of these characters having such heart and Dorothy having this ability to sort of take on these, you know, unwanted or uncollected characters and creating like a little family of her own with them.
Yes.
And I feel like that's also something that really resonated with me, maybe as, you know, maybe as someone who has felt myself in some ways, you know, a little outside of the norm or a little strange or, you know, whatever it is. Maybe especially as I got older, I suppose, that there's sort of this idea that you belong somewhere and that's what's inside that matters, you know, and that ugliness can sort of be a part of the heroism of the movie because everybody is so brave, you know, and everybody tries their best and all of these things. And it's sort of the ugliness that's part of the charm for me, I think, with those characters.
Yes.
I like that you brought up the brave thing too, because when I watched it most recently, I was thinking to myself, like, what is it as a little girl that made me love this film? Because like with the Little Mermaid, that was like, these two movies feel like rooted in my identity as a child. And with that one, there's very obvious parallels to things of why I could see it would have appealed to me. But with this one, I'm like, what is it? Like, yes, it's a very sort of thrilling adventure. It's got these really great like magical elements that are compelling, but I feel like there's something more. And I think part of it is her braveness because there's this scene where they're falling from the sky from the Gump creature that they've built. And Dorothy's like, oh, falling through the sky. And she's just like, oh, well, nothing we can do now. And she says something like that. And I was like, she's
can't
not
be
even
helped
scared.
now.
Something like that. Yeah. And I'm just like, that was probably so attractive to me, this main character girl who is fearless. She just takes life as it comes, like, well, let's see what happens next. It's an adventure. And I think that's part of it.
Absolutely. I think I loved that she was like kind of strange looking and like she wasn't like a cute Dorothy, you know, like Firuza Balk is kind of has a strange face. So she was a little bit weird looking and like in her life she was weird and nobody believed her that she had been to this fantastical place and like then got to go back and like met all these weird friends and like created her own little family. Like that felt so huge to me as such a weird kid that had like trouble making friends, like to you know, just the power of that she could create her own sort of world that nobody else could touch was so amazing to me.
Yeah, I think rewatching it, I was also thinking about Dorothy's very sort of innocent, childlike power, right? She was 9 when the movie was filming, whereas Judy Garland was 16, I think, when The Wizard of Oz was happening. So she's much younger and she looks young and, you know, she has these giant eyes and she's just,
But yeah,
you know,
she's meant to be older. Just weird.
I guess she's meant to be a little bit older. But yeah, Firuza Balk is known for the craft. You know, she later is this sort of iconic witch in a movie when she's older, and it's still that like haunting face. I feel like she's very beautiful, but she's definitely very different looking.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I listened to this podcast where they interviewed the guy who wrote and directed it, and he had this amazing quote about what he thought the message of the movie was. It absolutely resonates with what he said, and it also made me, I was amazed. But so he said, kind of the hidden message here is, kids, sometimes you have to rely on your own self, your inner being, and the friends that you make in the most unlikely places, like TikTok, Belina, Jack, and the Gump, and that grown-ups are not always acting in your best interest. Even sometimes though they think they're acting, and by certain lights they are acting in your best interest, but it might not turn out to be so. So you have to develop an inner core, and that is one of the themes of the film, and the reason for Dorothy defending her experience in Oz. She's not willing to simply knuckle under and say, no, that never happened. I was crazy. And in a sense, she reestablishes Oz within herself by the end of the film, against the forces which are all grown-ups trying to do things to her. I thought that was such a
Wow.
perfect, and I'm like, no
Wow.
wonder it resonated with me. And that's exactly like what
Yeah.
you were just saying.
It's interesting that at the end she even keeps the secret, hey? Like remember when she sees Ozma in the mirror and then turns the mirror when Auntie Emma asks her and she has decided to keep it to herself. She's not even going to try to make the adults understand anymore.
Yeah, like she doesn't need anyone else to validate her reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and looking at it from that perspective, like from a mental health trauma perspective as well, she had this experience that she believes in so deeply. And no matter how many times the adults are telling her, there's a moment where Aunt Em makes her repeat, like, why are you not supposed to talk about Oz? And she's like, because it's not real, or it's just my imagination. She sort of repeats what she's been told over and over again, but she still won't stop believing in herself, right? And then she goes to this scary electric shock place where. So one piece of trivia is that Walter Murch, the director, was like an acclaimed editor, and this is the only project that he directed. And he was known for his visual and sound editing, which made a lot of sense to me because I feel like, the creaking sounds in the clinic, the swishing
Yes.
of the dress of the nurse, like the sort of howling in the background, like the when she's combing the pumpkin when she's waiting, like just the sound of the scrape of the comb against the pumpkin. Like I feel like so many of those sounds are part of what really sticks with me about this movie. It's very
Yes,
sensual,
it is.
Very.
and very powerful. So anyway, she's in this terrifying place, and then Ozma appears, right? And I was kind of thinking throughout this movie, like, who's Ozma? There's a moment at the end when everything's resolved, and she says, I wish I could be at two places at once. And then suddenly Ozma appears. And so you get this sense of like, oh, Ozma is Dorothy in Oz. It's her sort of otherworld self. And I was watching this movie with my friend Mary, and we were kind of talking about like, okay, so who's Ozma? Is that her inner self or her higher self? And if Ozma is her inner self, thinking about it from a trauma perspective, if you take it purely from a mental health perspective, the tornado was the trauma, right? The house went down, Dorothy was in the house, whatever it is, she had this traumatic experience, and Oz was a way for her mind to understand that. She's not through the trauma, she's got all these trauma symptoms, she can't sleep, she can't stop talking about this imaginary world, whatever it is. And so rather than doing the electric shock therapy, which is we can talk more about that in a minute, but she actually does this practice that I do with my clients in many ways, where you go back into an experience that you had in the past, and you recreate it in your imagination, right? You can invite friends or archetypes or whatever into these traumatic moments that you had in the past. You can bring your adult self into that moment in the past where your inner child is stuck, and you can retrieve them from that experience. And so there's kind of this inner world practice that you can do that's adjacent to EMDR, in order to reprocess traumatic memories. So if you think about it that way, like she has to return to Oz in order to sort out the trauma, in order to resolve what feels unresolved, in order to find a way to reclaim her power, however you want to read what the trauma means to her. And then when she returns, she doesn't need anybody to believe her because she knows so deeply what it is within herself. And sometimes when I do this work with my clients, there can be this feeling of like, wow, like that was so powerful, but that would be really hard to explain to someone what I did. And it's like, well, you don't have to, right? Like nobody needs to know what that inner world is like. That inner world is yours. It doesn't have to belong to anybody else. And it's a place where you do have more power and control than you often think, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the fact that she sees Ozma in the mirror too, right? Like it's always when she's looking at herself that she sees
Yeah.
her. And yeah, kind of at the end, it's like this is between us, right? Like, and so yeah, that really makes sense that she doesn't need to explain it to anyone anymore.
Yeah, and I think, just sort of another piece that I was thinking of around the scariness of the movie, or the apparent scariness of the movie. So I wanted to do this podcast now because we're edging up to Halloween, right? It's spooky season, and it's sort of a lot of people when they rewatch Return to Oz, it's around this season, because it does have that darker quality. And I feel like there's something about how sanitized children's films have become in many ways, and how protected children are from anything that's a little bit scary. And of course, original fairy tales are horrifying,
Yeah.
right? Because children's lives were often horrifying. They were often facing death and plague and all kinds of scary things, and the fairy tales were meant to help them to process that, right? Sort of, again, from that mental health perspective. And so now we have these children's stories that are so bright and shiny and nothing bad ever happens. And it's like, well, maybe for some kids that resonates. Kids are safer in a lot of countries than they have been in the past, not everywhere, obviously. But maybe some children, like, the three of us, I think, resonated in some way with this sort of outcast story, and this little girl who was trying to find her inner power, and the grown-ups who think that they're doing the best thing for you, but it turns out that they're actually not. And so I was also kind of thinking about Halloween itself. Like, originally this Halloween Samhain was the blood harvest, right? It was sort of the day of slaughtering the animals in preparation for the winter. And there are traditional beliefs around the veils being thin around this time. In Mexico, Dia de los Muertos is like the Day of the Dead, right? It's the day that you remember the dead. It's the day that you remember and talk about your ancestors, the people that have passed over. And I think it's so interesting that Halloween has become this day of play with death for us, at least in Canada and US and so on. But we don't actually talk to our children about death. Like, it's not a day where we grieve or where we talk about, our lost ancestors. And I find for myself, just in the way that our culture is, I feel like, where is our grief day? Like, we need a grief day in the year. Like, November is a very grief sort of feeling day. And Remembrance Day, I feel like, is the closest to it for me, though it's sort of meant to be specifically about military. But, I had an experience with Remembrance Day last year where I was able to sit in the 2 minutes of silence in a ceremony, and I was able to think about my losses, as well in that moment. And it felt so healing for me to just have a moment where you remember, right? And I feel like we've lost that in our seasonal celebrations, and it should be Halloween or maybe winter solstice. But we don't do that. Like, we avoid it in this very interesting way where children can dress up as ghosts, but we're not going to talk about what a ghost is, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that blew me away. It's absolutely true. Like, yeah, the like Ring Around the Rosie, if you read the lyrics to Ring Around the Rosie, are horrifying.
It's about the plague, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember watching Return to Oz with my nephew and thinking about how strange this must be for him because, like you said, Labyrinth, there were lots of very strange and really dark, even like the old Disney movies, the parents were always dead. The parents were always...
They're still always dead. Every kids
always
movie,
dead. I know, I
parents
guess.
are dead.
I don't understand it. Yeah, I guess they're even dead in Frozen, aren't they?
Even the non-animated ones. Every kids movie, I keep being like, let's fast forward the part where they talk about how the parents die.
Yeah.
Speaking of, is protecting our kids from talking about death.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of that.
Yeah. So the new, like, what are the emotion ones called?
Oh, Inside Out.
Inside Out. Those are pretty cute, where they do actually talk about, some
Yes.
deep things, right, with kids, but they're not really like, they're kind of talking about it, but not really showing it in the same way. And so when I was watching my nephew watch this movie, I thought, like, I can see how he would find this quite upsetting because he's never had to face any of these sorts of themes at all before, right? So I thought, oh God, have I traumatized him?
I think a little bit about, like, because I've been surprised about all the things my son doesn't find scary and that he finds exciting. And I wonder how much of it is what we teach them is scary as well, and how they watch how we react and stuff. Like, when
Yeah.
he sees me, like, oh, this is so cool. He's like, it is cool, Mom. You know what I mean? And even, like, I've been trying so hard not to show that I'm afraid of spiders, for example. Little things, because I know I'm afraid because my mom modeled being terrified of spiders, so, but it's made me wonder about, like, how much of what they're afraid, like, what is considered, the difference between, like, actually scary and, like, spooky and fun. How much of that have we kind of somehow taught them by accident, or, you know? And the other thing
Yeah.
that resonated, Julie, talking about kind of avoiding conversations of death, it's so true that like I don't mind exposing him to any of these like spooky things, but anything actually dark, I'm the worst for like just sneaking and muting or like fast forwarding something because I'm like, I'm not ready to talk about it with him. Like to
Yeah.
imagine being born into this world that is so magical and you're not aware of all the horrors, like
Yeah.
to be able to preserve that just a little longer. And I always feel kind of guilty, like I'm doing him a disservice because that's just life. And I'm probably going to cause issues in him not being able to handle difficult things. But I don't even know where to start, or it feels like it's my work I have to do to learn how to handle those difficult things myself before I
Yeah.
can even try to hold space for him around those things,
Do
you
you
know?
remember when you like as a kid, do you remember when you sort of started to understand the concept of death? Because I absolutely don't. I
I
feel like I
distinctly
just
remember.
always really okay.
Yeah. I mean, I distinctly remember my parents. I don't remember which of the parents, but I remember like it being dark, being lying in bed, and them like telling me this. I don't know why, but my mind, who knows if my memory invented this, but randomly, my eldest brother is adopted, and they told me this news. And for some reason, my brain has joined it's this conversation where they told me these two difficult things. I'm like, your brother was adopted, and we all die one day. I just have this strong memory. And I remember
Good
picturing
night.
in my mind, yeah, exactly. I remember picturing like a spooky dark graveyard and being, and like skeleton shapes and being like, we die. And like, I still couldn't really process, like, but what does that mean, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like my parents handled my questions decently. They both are very open-minded. Neither of them are religious, so they don't have like a clear answer. They're more like, we have more questions than answers. We're curious, but we're optimistic kind of
Yes.
attitudes, which I
Yeah.
think was useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's difficult to think about how and when to broach that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to me to observe what my 3-year-old has been wanting to watch, and wanting to rewatch. You know, he has certain movies that he loves to watch again and again, and others that he's just like, yeah, whatever, I don't care about that. And two of his favorites have been Soul, which is a children's movie about death, and
Mm.
Totoro, which is a Miyazaki film that I also love. But in the rewatching, I'm noticing like, okay, it's rated G. And the mother is sick in the hospital, and there's a moment where they say out loud, what if she dies? So the mom's not there, the dad is kind of doing his best, and the girls are trying to figure out what it means that mom's in the hospital. And then towards the end of the movie, May, the 4-year-old, gets lost because she's trying to bring this corn to her mom to make her feel better. And it was so interesting because Grant got lost the other day, not for very long, but my mom and I went for a walk, and he was playing with his friend on the street, and then his friend left, and he, instead of going home, he tried to follow me and my mom, and then got lost, and like a little girl found him and brought him home, and like everything was fine. He was lost for like, a minute. Like
Oh my
it
God.
wasn't so bad. But obviously this was a big experience for him, and it was interesting to be able to watch Totoro and talk about like, that's exactly what happened to you. Like you were trying to look for mommy and you got lost. And in the movie, it's like the cat bus comes and they find May and like everything's okay. And he got found and like everything was okay. And so I feel like it was actually really helpful to kind of process that experience with him when there was a movie that sort of shows like what that can look like and how that can happen. And, I don't know what that was like for his little brain, but, it is interesting to think, Mel, about your nephew who's never had to experience death. And also, there is no shortage of death and stress and grief in your family, right? It's sort of like if he doesn't know about that, it's because he's been protected from it, not because it hasn't happened around
That's the
him,
thing.
right?
That's why, because my partner died in 2020 and he remembers him very, like, he was close with Rich. And so he definitely knows about death. And so that's kind of why that's part of the reason why I showed him Return to Oz, because I thought he understands this kind of on a level that he can't really explain, the darkness of it. And he took it well. He's a little goth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's this one parenting specialist woman, Dr. Becky or something. I think she wrote the book
Yeah.
Good Inside, and she has a really nice way of describing how you can handle this if like someone your child knows dies. Because knock on wood, but luckily I haven't had to do that yet. But and she says to tell them like their body stopped working, to leave it like
Mm,
really objective in that kind of way. And I was like, oh, that's a just one other view that was like maybe a helpful way to start thinking about that, you know.
yeah.
Yeah, and And one thing I thought about with Return to Oz is, what if this is a death afterlife fantasy?
Mm.
What if she
Hmm.
dies in the river and the whole rest of the movie
Yeah.
is her afterlife? There's also a
Yeah, I've thought of
Miyazaki
that.
movie called Ponyo that that if you watch it with that lens of like, this is actually, the whole town dies in the tsunami and the whole rest of the story is about like the magic of the afterlife and sorting out the fact that you've died and stuff.
Mm.
Because it's a terrifying scene, I think, when she and Ozma are trying to run away from the evil nurse and they get in the river. I mean, like, a child getting in a river is like, that's a horrifying nightmare.
Yeah.
And she's found by the river like several days later. I think they don't, or maybe it's the next morning or something like that. Like, there's a sense that Aunt Em and Henry have been searching for so long that Uncle Henry almost lost hope. So there is this sort of hint of like, death or possible death or getting
Hmm.
lost or whatever it is. And
And
there's such
doesn't
a happy ending there.
but doesn't
Um,
Ozma die? Like, doesn't the real world Ozma die? Don't they say something about that?
I don't think
Not
so,
in
but
Return to Oz, yeah.
No?
no, she becomes the queen
No, no,
because if
in the real
you,
world, like real, the girl that goes into the river with her, she drowns,
oh, does
I
right?
don't
she?
remember that.
Because
She
they're in that thing
might.
to. Oh no, she doesn't get in. Remember,
She
the
she sort
wooden
of
thing.
disappears, but yeah, there's no sense
Yeah.
of what happened to her. I mean, I guess my sense is like, she was cursed by Mombi to be stuck in the mirror, but
Yeah,
somehow, so there's this interesting thing about how like Ozma has this power with mirrors only in Oz, and she can't step out of the mirror in Oz, but she can appear in bodied form in the real world, which is very interesting. So I guess
yeah,
my sense was always that she just like retreated to the other world,
gotcha.
when like she got
Mm.
Dorothy into the crib or whatever it was, and then
Yeah,
she just disappeared. But it's interesting that you assumed that she drowned. I feel like you could
yeah.
read it that way. And then she's in the
Yeah,
mirror as sort of like a ghost, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
read her as like not being like a real person in the real world, but sort of like visiting from Oz too, sort of is
right,
how I.
Like,
right.
it's unclear if anyone else can see her.
Yeah, if she's even
Well,
real, you know what I
there
mean?
is so much foreshadowing in the real world. Like yesterday, I was at the store and I saw this little mini pumpkin, and I immediately, every time I see a little pumpkin, I think I got to get a comb,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
like there's just so many references in my head
Do you
all the
know?
time. But the guy that is about to give her electric shock is the Gnome King. And the
Yes.
woman that's chasing her, the nurse, is Mombi. Like,
Yeah.
like there's so many like the pumpkin is Jack the Pumpkinhead,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
there's so
The the
many.
It's
the the guys who are pushing
Yes, are the
the
Wheelers.
carts are the
stretcher are the
wheelers.
wheelers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's so funny you say that because as a little girl, I had a little outfit that looked like Return to Oz Dorothy's that I'd have to wear with braids. And if I ever found those, excuse me, I don't know about building supplies, but I think they're called nuts and bolts, but like those silver circles. If I ever like found one out in the ground, I'd have to be like, oh,
Oh,
Z,
yes.
pretend like this
Oh
Yeah,
is
my
a
yeah,
thing
yeah.
to
God.
me. Like I had
I've
so many of these little things. Or
a
you know when they have
hundred
like
percent.
rocks set in stone around mini malls and stuff, I'd have to jump from one to one being like, Deadly Desert. Like
The
Yes.
Deadly
those
Desert.
references
Yeah.
still stay with me to this day. Like I can't help but like have
A
that live
hundred
in
percent.
my
If I go
Yeah,
to
mind.
I
like Value
actually
Village and find like emerald colored things, I was Oz.
Oz.
Yeah,
I'm
we
so
have to.
thankful you guys exist. This is
Speaking
Yeah.
of
validating.
that, though, like Halloween, and Julie brought it up too. I've been Ozma for Halloween. I've been Dorothy like probably 5 times. Like, and this year I'm like, okay, what can I be? Like, it's always like you get. I've never been happier than the day that I dressed up as Ozma. I was out of my mind, and I was like 35 years old. It's so fun to like get to live that out, kind of, right?
Yeah.
There's one of my favorite moments is when she's eating limestone pie and hot melted silver
Yes.
with the Gnome King. And she takes a bite of this limestone pie and she's like, it's good. It looks so good. And I've always craved limestone pie and hot melted silver.
Yeah.
And it actually shows up in
Absolutely.
my latest book. There's a moment when the queen of winter and the goddess of spring are they're like munching on icicles together, and I was thinking about that moment with the limestone pie. And when I was watching it with Mary, it was funny because I had brought her some birthday cake, and at that scene I was like, wait, We need tea and cake like now. So we got to have our tea and cake while we were watching that scene, and I was just like, that's the best. Like, it just being able
Yeah,
to imagine that I can eat limestone pie and hot melted silver, like just something about that has really stuck with me. So
I
many of those
literally,
little sensual
yeah,
moments.
Mhm.
I literally
Yeah.
paused the movie at that scene, Julie, and asked my son, like, what do you think it would taste like? Because I always had such a visceral
Yeah.
feeling of what it would taste like when I saw that scene, always.
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
funny.
And like the tea and cake was like perfect in that moment, but you know it's not limestone pie and hot melted silver. Like there's
Yeah.
something that's like it's a
I know,
taste I want to experience, but I know I can't.
yes.
Yes.
My husband happened to be like passing by and he was like, yeah, I don't think you could drink that. I was like, shh, you're bringing the
Shut up.
fantasy
You can
here.
in Oz, you can drink it in Oz.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
Yeah.
weird
also
the
love
things
the
that stick with you.
lunchbox
Yeah, oh
tree.
my God, the lunch pail
So
tree.
cool.
It's so cool. And the
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 lunch pail
red
tree, yeah,
the
yeah.
red key for me, it was that red
Yes,
key
the
With the
ruby
ribbon on
key.
pulling
it,
the
yeah,
ribbon off
yeah,
that,
Yes,
like, I just am
definitely.
obsessed with it. I thought
yeah.
I've been planning to get
Yeah,
that tattooed to me, and I thought, is that too weird? Am I too mental? But
Oh
I
no,
love
that's a
it.
I don't
Me
great
too.
idea.
know,
I might have to get
right?
that
Yeah,
too.
me too.
Love that
Let's
little
do
key.
it.
Oh,
I
that
definitely
moment
had
had taken,
I had a phase, I
Yes.
think, when I would collect keys and like, just
yes,
imagine the magic of what a key could do. And
yes.
actually with the book I'm writing now, I have a chapter on Hecate, who's the goddess of witches. And keys are her thing, right? Like she has these magical keys that can open the doors to the underworld. And
Mm,
I feel like that was part of the magic of the OZ key and then the Mombi key,
Hmm.
and this idea that
Yeah.
the key allows her to, change her head, as you said, or to be able to go to the Gnome King or return to the real world or to Oz or whatever it is. It's like these keys hold the magical portals.
yeah.
And yeah, I feel like that's never going to quite leave me. I love that idea.
How
Yeah.
cool was it too, the powder of life that she could
Yeah.
have all these inanimate objects and like just sprinkle this powder on them and they would come to life like that,
Yeah,
like,
we
and
are
just like make
Fiat.
yourself friends. Yeah, yeah. Oh my God.
Sorry. I had to.
Yes. How, like, I think as like maybe like a lonely kid, that just seems so magical to me. Like I could turn
Yes.
the anything in my life into my friends. That's so sad
Yeah,
coming out of
yeah.
my mouth, but like,
Totally get it.
yeah,
Totally get
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, it was
You
also
know,
kind of interesting how the Gump, because we were talking about death and life and so on, and it's sort of interesting how TikTok is so happily not alive. Like he says a few times, like, thank goodness, like, why didn't you turn to stone like everyone else in Oz? And he was like, because I'm not alive, thank goodness. I never have to deal with being alive.
yeah.
And the Gump has a bit of a complicated relationship with being brought back to life, because he's just like, oh, I gotta do this again. Like I don't really want, and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
we have to
Yeah.
reattach the sofa so you can walk around. He's like, no, like just let me be a head, I'm fine. Gump is a
It's
little
funny because
reluctant to be alive.
yeah, the book really deals with this quite directly. It also has the powder of life and stuff. And Jack is constantly paranoid about his head spoiling in the book,
Right, right,
Mm,
yes.
yeah.
which is interesting. He's very like preoccupied with that. And there's a lot of things about who's alive and who's not. Actually, there's
Right.
something from a couple
Mm.
interesting sort of gender things I wanted to bring up about from the book. Do you guys know Ozma's sort of backstory of who she is in this
No, not
original
really.
story? Because so Ozma, there was the Wizard of Oz took over Oz from a king whose daughter was Ozma. So when he died, she should have become the Queen of Oz, not the wizard. But the wizard got this witch Mombi to hide Ozma away. So it turns out Ozma was turned into a boy as a baby named
Mm.
Tip and was raised as a boy. And it's the end of the Marvelous Land of Oz book, spoiler alert, by the way, where they find out that actually Tip is Ozma. And he has this whole like, but I don't want to be a girl, I'm a boy. And there's this whole thing around that. And that's literally the point
Wow.
I'm at right now. But
Wow.
that I thought was super interesting. And then at the beginning of the Ozma of Oz book, when Bellina comes in, Bellina's name was Bill. And there's this whole conversation of with Dorothy how the people who when she hatched thought she was a boy and named her Bill, and then later they realized she was a female chicken. So, but they kept calling her Bill, so she goes by Bill. And Dorothy's like, "That's no good. Then we're going to call you Billina because you're a girl. That makes you a girl's name." So it's like there's some very interesting things that come up in these books.
Huh? Yeah.
There's also that kind of
Yeah.
draggy moment when the Gnome King pokes his little
Yes.
ruby slippers out from his robes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
The Gnome King is like adorned with jewels, and he's got this great crown with emeralds on it and stuff. And
Yeah.
it is kind of an interesting moment when he pokes his little sparkly feet out and then sort of brings them back in under his robes, to keep them. And they're obviously a magical tool, but I feel like there is also a little bit of a queer touch in that
Definitely.
moment too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the apparently Frank L. Baum wanted to do stories more like Hans Christian Andersen and Brothers Grimm and stuff that were like the darker kind of kids' fairy tales. And we noticed like his work also, like Hans Christian Andersen's work also had those kind of themes showing up.
Mm-hmm. The shape shifting and the
Yeah,
gender bending and stuff like that. Yeah.
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 So that was super
Yeah,
interesting.
there was a piece that I noticed. So I've never really watched this movie critically before because I've only ever watched it as like
That's the
something that I
thing.
love deeply.
That's the thing. When you were like, let's do this, I was like, okay, great. Like we'll just talk about like I love this part, I love that part, but like obviously we're not going to do that. But it is
We could do
interesting
that
to
too.
look at it. It's interesting to look at it like and actually think. It's honestly the first time I've ever thought about why I love it, like it's just something that I loved so much as a kid and I could never really explain why. So yeah, to look at it as an adult and really kind of analyze why do I love this when so many other people hated it?
That quote I thought was so helpful to me to understand too, because I think how I grew up, where like the adults are right and you're wrong, and we don't want to hear what you thought or what your view was, it really felt like my perception then was constantly being told that it was not correct, and that was very difficult. So I think that was also very attractive, Dorothy's like belief in her own way of seeing the world and kind of validating that it's okay if I see the world differently. Like it almost feels like, I know this is going to sound nuts, but like my higher self or my adult self gave a little love letter to baby Tracy to be like, you need
Yeah.
this
Mm,
information going forwards. You know what I mean?
hmm.
Like,
Yes.
yeah,
That's such important information that adults don't always have it right.
Yeah.
yeah,
Because that's true. I mean, the electric shock thing is so interesting. So one piece that I was just thinking about is sort of the technophobia and the mental health phobia of the movie a little
hmm
bit. Like,
yeah,
the Wizard of Oz, I don't think they place themselves in time so specifically, but there's a moment when the doctor says like it's 1899 or whatever, like we're right in the cusp of the 20th century, and electricity is a big theme, like things turning on and off, and electricity being this sort of new power that no one had ever really experienced before, and having this new technology that could help Dorothy with her mental health. There's so many mental health interventions that people have brought in with the best of intentions, that have turned out to be really harmful later down the line. And I think especially for people who have delusions or schizophrenia or treatment-resistant depression, electric shock therapy is still used today as sort of like a last line treatment for people who aren't responding to other treatments. And it's still scary, it's still a really, really intense treatment. As a therapist, I feel obviously that many of these interventions can be helpful, and I, believe deeply that people can heal and all of these things. And also, I deeply get how patriarchal and colonial the therapy industry has been. And I have many people come to work with me because I'm a bit of a different therapist. I work a little more with a yoga background, a meditation background. I come with a lot of somatic practices, and people come to me having done like CBT, which is a very like change your thoughts and that will change your life. And it's a very sort of colonial way of looking at things. Like if you can just force your thoughts to be different, then you can make all of the stuff underneath your brain follow your directions, right? And I go the other way. It's sort of like, okay, how can we listen to and learn from the body, and then let the brain learn from the information the body is giving you, which is a little bit more of, I work with indigenous teaching sometimes in this sort of indigenous perspective of like, it's the relationship that we're looking at, not so much some singular person, like the adult, I guess, in this metaphor, saying, I know what's best for you. We try to do that with our brains to our bodies, but actually what we need to be doing is listening to the inner children, right? The sensations in the body, all of those things in order to heal. So anyway, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but it was interesting to watch the the fear of therapy and to totally get that. Like, I think she has every right to fear this particular therapy. And also, electricity is a new innovative thing, and there are new innovations within mental health that do help. But a lot of the time, we just don't know until we've tried these things for a while, and it just turns out they don't work. Like, I think even as adults, there are a lot of moments where we might be thinking about, oh, well, this doctor told me I should take this medicine, so I guess that's what I should do. Or this teacher told me this is how I'm supposed to do it, so I guess that's what I do. And I feel like it's still a really important lesson as adults to use our inner wisdom alongside and sometimes against those opinions that we're getting, because those opinions, even when they're coming from that best of intentions, only have so much information. And sometimes the responses our body has is just an important piece of information we need to be including when we're making decisions about whether it's medication or how to raise our children or, you know, all of these things. Like, there's a ton of opinions, right? But but how do we really know what to do? Like, a lot of the time we have to kind of listen to our instincts. And I feel like that's so much of what Dorothy does is she's just showing up a lot of time. She's just like, she doesn't even know how she takes down the Gnome King, but she does it, right?
But you can see, like, in the hospital that she is uncomfortable. She doesn't trust them. And it is almost like Ozma, that the real world Ozma is maybe her inner wisdom that comes and unbuckles the buckles and leads her to, you know, safety, which is interesting.
Her instinct, I thought it was powerful that it's like, even though she's like brave and looks out for herself, it's not like she's not rebellious either. Like, you notice she listens to what the adults tell her, and she's like respectful and well behaved, but also ultimately runs away.
I wonder if she would have, though, without Ozma.
Yeah,
which again is maybe herself, right? I love the moment when they're strapping her down to the stretcher, and she just argues in this extremely polite way.
Yes,
she's
absolutely.
She's just like, I'd like to stay sitting, please. And they're like, you have to lie down. And she's like, I'd really prefer to stay sitting. And they're like, you have to listen to the nurse. And she's like, okay. They're like, why are you strapping me down? They're like, so you won't fall off. And she goes, I came all the way here in the buggy and I didn't fall off. Just a little sassy, you know. She's like, well, just so you know.
My son was like, I don't think she's going to fall. Like, she didn't. I'm like, I know. That's.
So I love her little gentle protests. Yeah.
But again, they're like, it's the adults like saying something that is clearly not true.
Yeah.
That's not why they're strapping her down.
Exactly.
Right?
And she knows and she's letting them know she knows.
Yeah.
But the nerdy piece of trivia is that machine that he uses where he's like, look, it has eyes and a nose and it's a face. That was a real machine used for that.
Oh,
back in that time. Yes,
whoa.
That the writer-director found at like an antique shop. Isn't that insane?
That is insane.
I thought that was super cool.
I just so appreciate the details in this movie. Like, again, from that director-editor perspective where he's looking at the specific images, the specific props, you know, the specific sounds he's gonna amplify. I feel like it creates such a richness to the fantasy as you're watching it and looking at it.
As I said, I just did this deep dive and I learned all these things that made me realize why I love this so much. I didn't realize the puppetry in this. It's like, I think it's Jim Henson's son did all of it.
Oh, okay.
And Disney tried to stop this guy from creating the film. George Lucas is who saved this film. They tried to, when Disney saw what was actually being done, that it wasn't some happy Wizard of Oz thing, they tried to shut it down.
Wow.
And George Lucas came in and saved the film. So no wonder it's like George Lucas and the Henson, so it's all these great people. No wonder it's an excellent film. How is it so underrated?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there was just one other piece. We were talking about colonialism or colonial energies a moment ago, and there was one piece I hadn't noticed before when I watched it previous times, and I think maybe with more of an Indigenous lens that I've just been learning more about this perspective in the last few years, is that there's a moment where the Gnome King says, these emeralds were all mine, and they were stolen, I think by the King of Oz. Or somebody took the emeralds from the Gnome King. And, you know, the Gnome King is so obviously a villain in this movie. And at the same time, if we look at it from that perspective, wait a second, the Gnome King's emeralds were stolen. And, you know, Dorothy cries and she says, you know, the Scarecrow, they were there when he got there. You know, it's not his fault. He didn't know. And when Mary and I were talking about it, she was also mentioning just that theme of like, if the land was stolen before you got there, does that absolve you of responsibility? You You know, like what does that mean? And the Gnome King, if we read him as coming in trying to right a wrong that's been done to his body, if we think of him as like his body is the land and the emeralds, and Dorothy's like, you have so much, and he's like, that's not the point. This was stolen from my body. Then how do we read that, right? And when I was thinking about it in that way, and then watching this sort of happy celebration where all the emeralds are back in Oz and the Gnome King has been killed, and all the gnomes with him, I guess, right? I mean, there's sort of this whole land of people that just, of sentient beings that's just gone now. What if he was trying to avenge, what had been done wrong? And then we're all celebrating that the colonialists got to keep their emeralds, right? Like, hold on a second.
It might not surprise you that the author of the books wrote some very problematic things about Indigenous people. That are so awful, I don't even want to say them here. But if anyone's curious, they can Frank L. Baum views. It's pretty bad. So that's not surprising. I mean, I don't know if that about the Gnome King is in the books. I haven't gotten to that, but maybe that's reflected somewhere in there.
Yeah. So that tracks with that sort of pasting over the Indigenous perspective. And I mean, the Gnome King, again, he's such an obvious villain. He's sort of taking advantage of Dorothy. He's being unfair. He's another adult, I guess, who's trying to tell Dorothy,
Yes.
what the actor is, the doctor, and so on, trying to tell Dorothy what she's supposed to do and so on. And yet, what about the gnomes? What does that mean that their emeralds were taken?
Is to turn other people into ornaments. Because he's like, you took my gems just to be ornaments, but then he takes them and turns people into ornaments. So it's also
right.
Interesting.
Which brings me back a bit, this is sort of a half-formed thought, but it brings me back to Mombi and the sort of violent vanity that she has, right?
Yes.
The sort of collecting objects and, wanting to have these pretty heads for different contexts and being willing to take someone's head in order for herself to look beautiful. And then the Gnome King is someone who's really obsessed with things and ornaments and, I mean, that whole scene where they're in the ornament room and they're touching the different ones. And with the learning I've been doing in the last couple of years, I was also looking in the ornament room for I was curious if there would be any references to gods, goddesses, mythology, statuettes of goddesses, and so on. And there actually wasn't any. The ornaments were all pretty neutral. Though Mombi did in her bed have this sort of big winged woman that's sort of reminiscent of Isis. And so I was kind of wondering if she had a little bit of a reference to a goddess. And some of these older goddesses they have a vanity aspect to them or a beauty aspect to them that can get them in trouble sometimes. Isis loved her lapis, her gems and riches, and, Inanna, there's the whole story about Inanna sort of removing all of the pieces of her finery in order to go into the underworld and learn her underworld lessons and stuff like that. So there's something about things and materialism and vanity and things being pretty that's showing up here.
I did just read something about collecting being associated with people dealing with grief or avoiding grief. People get very obsessed with collecting things.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I mean, hoarding is an issue that comes up sometimes in my practice, and that's been an interesting one to think about because it's gathering things into a space, and the space gets more and more filled in this kind of claustrophobic way. But energetically, it is this feeling of I don't want to let go of anything. I'm trying to sort of use these material objects to fill the emptiness that I feel, with grief or my anxiety or whatever it is. There's something really soothing about things. And, in that scene in the ornament room, I feel I also sort of had a phase as a child of collecting things. I still do it a bit. I'm not so bad about it, but I still have I collect tarot cards and crystals and I have a few little items that if I had a key that looked like an OZ, it would be here on my altar, I'll tell you. But just the little things that kind of give you that little bit of comfort or a little bit of sustenance or whatever. Even the necklaces I'm wearing, I like having little gems and jewels to kind of have with me. There's something about that feels maybe a little magical, these items have magic in them, but also, maybe there is something about that kind of holding this rock makes me feel better on a very visceral level. Holding this piece of earth, in my hand.
It's nice to believe those things. I'm a collector of ridiculous old-timey things, and if there's Oz things, I can't not buy them. I can't not.
It's interesting too because I'm not sure if this is the same for you guys, but my sense is that it is. I liked The Wizard of Oz fine, but I love Return to Oz. Like, I don't
Yeah.
rewatch The Wizard of Oz. I tried watching it with my kid a while ago. He wasn't interested. I wasn't really interested. Like, I might wait a bit to
Yeah.
show him Return to Oz just because I don't want to totally terrify him, but I want him to see it, you know?
Yeah, my son's take on it, the only thing where he said, that's kind of scary was, the Gnome King sort of spies in the rock, the little faces that show in the rock. He looked at me and went, that's kind of scary. And I went, but like in a fun way, right? And he goes, yeah. And then he just forgot about it. So he might be okay.
Yeah, sometimes you can tell them how to feel. That's helpful. What I was thinking about that was so interesting about The Wizard of Oz, and Mel, you might know more about this from your sorry I brought it up perspective, which is that Return to Oz is scary as a movie, but I feel like there is a sense of there was so much heart going into this movie and like so many people that really loved it and so on. The Wizard of Oz, it has scary moments. Like I think the flying monkeys are kind of scary, and the witch can be scary, but it definitely is like a children's movie. It's very cheery, like all of that stuff. But the production of that movie is filled with lore about many people died. One of the Munchkin people like shot someone on set. Someone got lead poisoning from the makeup. The witch, I think her face went on fire because they were doing all these crazy, like speaking of the sort of technophobia technology, changing thing. Like this movie, they were trying to do all these new technologies to do these cool effects in movies, and they were actually really harming the actors and the people in the production team. Like people were getting burned and chemical issues and all kinds of stuff.
Judy Garland was on speed
heat.
to try to keep her thin, and
because she was older than the character was supposed to be, and she was getting boobs and stuff, and so they just gave her drugs to make her thinner. And she, of course, went on to have a lot of drug issues in her life. So it's actually, there's so much darkness like behind The Wizard of Oz, and it's more out front with Return to Oz, but Return to Oz doesn't have the same sort of terrifying like real life events that happened with Wizard of Oz. Okay, so let me ask you guys a question. So one of the things I noticed in this latest rewatch is that Jack wants to call Dorothy mom. And there's this whole thing about him calling her mom, and she's like okay with that. And the only sort of piece that I could think about was that collecting of odd objects and kind of being a mom to the motherless, I guess. But I was wondering if you guys had any other thoughts about that. Like there was something a bit odd about how he really wanted Dorothy to be mom, and it turned out Ozma was his real mom, which is like his creator. But
I wonder if that's another part of Ozma and Dorothy kind of being the same person. Another little reference to that,
Yeah, and Mary was mentioning too, like maybe it's a doll thing, like little girls wanting to play with dolls, and Jack was kind of her doll, like wanting to take care, but she doesn't really have a maternal relationship with him so much. Like they're more like friends, but he wants to call her mom.
Yeah.
In the book, it's Tip who made Jack, and then the witch Mombi brings it to life to try to like scare the boy, and then Jack insists on calling him father, which he doesn't really like that he calls him father. But Jack Pumpkinhead is very like, oh, but I want to call you father kind of thing. So he lets him. And then, of course, he becomes Ozma. So then Ozma is his mom, is who created him. But I don't know how they interpreted that in putting it into Return to Oz, since the stories it's sort of like a fusion of some different things. It does take some things literally. Like there's some, like when Mombi says to Dorothy, like, you're not beautiful, but you're quite pretty. That line is like directly from the book. Like, so there's some things they've grabbed directly, and then there's some things they kind of collage and take liberties with. So it's hard to tell what they're trying to like honor from the originals and what they're creating their own new statement with,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of interesting too that everything is on Dorothy. Like all of these characters are kind of relying on Dorothy to get them home or get them out. So to call her mom, like, I don't know, she really has a lot on her shoulders,
Mm-hmm.
And they help her, for sure. Like she definitely doesn't do it all on her own.
Yeah.
I wonder if it ties into that discussion of more like adults and having to listen to what adults say and make your own decisions and guidance, that like she could be the mom. Maybe there's something in that too.
Yeah.
Like her own mom, like reparenting yourself.
Yeah.
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 Mm.
Yeah, that would make sense too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else that you guys wanna mention about Return to Oz?
I mean, I guess we're all going to get Return to Oz tattoos now.
Yeah.
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 Exactly. That's what
For
I'm
sure.
thinking.
That's the conclusion of this podcast.
Yeah.
It's nice
Yeah.
to meet other people though, because I feel like my best friend and I, when we were kids, we were, actually weren't friends yet, and there was one copy of Return to Oz in our local video store, and we knew that there was another kid that was renting it, and so I would try to get it before she would, and back and forth. And she's the only person I've ever met who loves it as much as I do, like just obsessively loves it. And so it's nice to talk to other people who love it just as much, because I feel like we are
Absolutely.
rare.
Yeah.
Which
It's so nice
surprises
to have
me. I
someone
just
to
assumed
nerd out about
everybody
this.
loved this movie. And when a friend of mine is like, "What movie are you talking about?" I'm like, "Oh my God, you have to sit down and immediately watch this movie with me."
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure how much Mary liked it because she'd never seen it. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
you're watching this with me now. Like, you have no
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah, it was funny when
Yeah.
I mentioned it to you when we did the Wayne's World one, and I mentioned it to you. I thought, there's no way that Julie doesn't know and love this movie. There's no way.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like you can tell when you meet somebody that
Yeah.
they are going to be a Return to Oz person or not.
Yeah. Well, it's been a delight to be able to nerd out on Return to Oz with you two. I'm sure we're not the only ones that are
No.
obsessed with this movie. Thank you so much, you guys. That was
Thank
awesome
you.
to
Yeah, I
have
loved
that
it.
chat. And
Yeah.
we'll have to find out what other 80s movies we're all three obsessed
Yeah.
with.
Bye.
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 So I hope you enjoyed our chat about Return to Oz today. Go and have a rewatch around Halloween if this is a movie that you love too. If you've never seen it, give it a try and find out if you're weird like us and love this movie as much as we do. Mel is my social media coordinator. If you happen to need somebody like that, she has a company with her brother Jeff called Raw Raw Creative Co. And definitely follow her at Sorry I Brought It Up if you want a little bit more of that sort of dark pop culture perspective on things. That's on TikTok. I'm also on TikTok at Popcorn Therapy. And I'm on Instagram at Julie Peters Wellness. You can also get in touch with me for therapy, for tarot readings, for my blog posts, for yoga. Even there's lots of stuff on my website at juliepeters.ca. So please be in touch. Don't forget to follow this podcast and share it with your friends, your obsessed friends with Return to Oz. So thanks again for listening, and we'll catch up next time.